On a warm, quiet night in 1957, a young Brazilian farmer noticed a red light hovering over his fields. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen. Shadows moved silently, and figures, small, humanoid, and strange, emerged from the glow. They guided him aboard a craft, a place of impossible sights, mysterious procedures, and sensations beyond imagination. 4 hours, he would witness wonders that could not be explained, secrets that lingered long after he returned to his home. What really happened that night, and what truths did he carry back with him? Chapter 1. The night the fields began to listen. On a quiet October night in 1957, under a sky crowded with stars, a young farmer stepped into a moment that would quietly reshape UFO history, though he had no way of knowing it. Then Antônio Villas Boas did not go looking for mystery. He went looking for relief from the heat. The farmland near São Francisco de Sales, in the wide rural stretches of Minas Gerais, held warmth long after sunset. During the day, the sun pressed down relentlessly, flattening shadows and draining strength. But at night, the land softened. The air loosened its grip. Work became possible again. That was why Antonio waited for darkness before guiding his tractor into the fields. It was a routine born of necessity, not romance. And yet, there was something quietly beautiful about it. The engine's steady rhythm rolled across the soil. Furrows opened and closed beneath metal blades. Insects hummed their endless songs, unseen but constant. Above it all, the sky stretched vast and unobstructed, free from city lights, crowded with stars that felt sharper and closer than anywhere else on Earth. If you have ever stood beneath such a sky, you understand the feeling. Not fear, not wonder exactly, just awareness, a sense that the universe is very large and very quiet. Antonio had grown up with this sky. He didn't study it. He didn't question it. It was simply there, the same way the land was there, and the seasons, and the work that needed to be done. He was known as practical, grounded, uninterested in superstition. He didn't read science fiction. He didn't chase strange stories. His life revolved around soil, family, and effort. That night began no differently. The tractor moved steadily forward. Antonio adjusted his grip on the wheel, his thoughts drifting in simple, unremarkable ways. How much field remained, how long the fuel would last, what awaited him when dawn came. There was no tension in him, no unease, until the sky changed. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker at the edge of vision, a red point of light among the stars. Antonio glanced upward briefly, the way anyone might, then returned his attention to the field. Stars shift. Eyes tire. The night plays tricks, but the light did not behave like a star. It did not fade. It did not drift. It lingered. Antonio looked up again. The red glow had grown brighter, deeper in color, more defined. It was no longer fixed in place. It was moving slowly, separating itself from the starfield behind it, descending, not falling, lowering itself with patience, as if it knew exactly where it was going. The engine sound seemed suddenly too loud. Antonio eased his foot off the accelerator. The tractor slowed, its rhythm faltering. He watched the light as it continued downward, his chest tightening, not with panic, but with confusion. The movement felt deliberate, controlled. Then the tractor shuddered. The engine coughed once and died. The headlights flickered and went dark. Silence rushed in to fill the space where sound had been. It wasn't the peaceful silence of countryside night. It was abrupt, complete, and heavy, like a door slamming shut on the familiar world. Antonio turned the key again. Nothing. He tried once more. Still nothing. The tractor had never failed him like this. He climbed down slowly, boots pressing into the soil. The red light hovered closer now, casting a faint glow across the field. Shadows stretched and shifted in ways that didn't quite make sense. The air felt different, not warmer, just altered, as if the space itself had become aware of being watched. Antonio stood very still. Have you ever felt that moment? That instant when curiosity and instinct collide? When something tells you to run, but another part of you needs to understand. He took a step forward. That was when the shapes appeared. They emerged from the glow without drama, without announcement. Small figures, compact and efficient in their movements. Their suits clung tightly to their bodies, reflecting the red light in dull metallic tones. Helmets concealed their heads, erasing anything recognizable, anything human. Antonio's breath caught. His mind searched for explanations. Workers, divers, soldiers, but none fit. Their proportions were wrong. Their movements too synchronized, too precise. Before he could decide what to do, they moved toward him. He turned and ran. The soil grabbed at his boots. His heart hammered in his chest. He didn't make it far. Hands closed around his arms. They were stronger than they looked, colder than expected. Antonio struggled, shouted. But the night swallowed the sound. The beings made short, sharp, noisy signals, rather than speech. There was no anger in them, no urgency, only intent. He was guided toward the object, now fully visible above the ground. It rested on 3 extended legs, smooth and seamless, shaped like an enormous metallic egg. Its surface reflected the field, the sky, the man being pulled toward it. A section opened along its side, revealing a ladder descending toward the earth. Antonio resisted again, his body reacting even as his mind struggled to keep up. But resistance did nothing. He was guided upward, rung by rung, leaving the soil behind. The higher he climbed, the more unreal it felt. Inside, the air carried a sharp, unfamiliar scent, clean, sterile, edged with something chemical. The interior glowed softly, illuminated without visible lamps. The walls curved seamlessly, smooth and unbroken, like the inside of a single piece of metal, shaped by intention rather than tools. There were no windows, no controls he recognized, no sense of direction. His clothes were removed quickly, without ceremony. A thick substance was spread across his skin. Cool, viscous, strangely calming, despite the situation. Antonio's body trembled, not from cold, but from the impossibility of it all. This wasn't blurred or fragmented like a dream. It was precise. Ordered. Something pressed beneath his chin. A brief, sharp pain. Later, he would find marks there, small, undeniable. Then the gas filled the room. Gray and heavy. It pressed into his lungs, thickening his breath. Nasius surged. His body folded inward as it tried to reject what it couldn't escape. The beings watched without reaction, as though this was expected, accounted for. Time lost its shape. Moments stretched and collapsed. Antonio could not tell how long he lay there. His thoughts drifted, then snapped back into focus. And then, the others withdrew. She entered alone. She was unlike the rest. Her skin was pale and smooth, almost luminous in the soft light. Her eyes were large, slanted, in a striking blue, unfamiliar, unsettling, impossible to forget. Light hair framed her face, but what stood out most was the vivid red hair at her body. A detail so specific it burned itself into memory. She did not speak. She moved toward him with calm certainty. In her presence, fear loosened its grip, replaced by something harder to name: confusion, vulnerability, a sense that this moment had a purpose beyond comfort or harm. What followed felt deliberate, detached from emotion, yet heavy with meaning. When it ended, she stepped back. She placed a hand on her abdomen. Then she looked upward, toward the ceiling, toward the stars beyond. The message did not need words. Something had been set in motion. Later, Antonio wandered the craft, unsteady but aware. A need rose in him, not to escape, but to anchor this experience in proof. His fingers brushed a small device, smooth and cool. Before he could take it, one of the beings intervened. Gently, firmly. Some things were not meant to be carried away. Soon after, he was guided back down the ladder and returned to the field. The craft lifted silently, its red glow intensifying, then shrinking as it rose, until it vanished into the night sky as quietly as it had arrived. The stars resumed their distant watch. Antonio stood alone. The tractor remained lifeless. His body felt altered, heavy, aching, unfamiliar. When he finally made his way home, the night no longer felt comforting. It felt observant. In the days that followed, headaches bloomed behind his eyes. His vision burned. Lesions appeared on his skin. Food lost its appeal. Sleep offered no relief. And yet, beneath all of it, one certainty remained steady and unyielding. Something had happened, and the fields that once knew only his footsteps now seemed to remember something else as well. The night had listened, and it would not forget. Chapter 2. The Red Light That Refused to Fade. Long before the night, everything changed. The sky had already begun to behave differently. Antonio would later return to this thought again and again, replaying earlier evenings in his mind, wondering if the signs had always been there, and he had simply walked past them. Memory has a quiet way of rearranging itself after something extraordinary happens. Small details grow heavier. Ordinary moments take on new weight. About 10 days before the night of the silent tractor, Antonio noticed the light for the first time. It was late, well past sunset, the fields wrapped in their usual calm. He had paused his work briefly, wiping sweat from his brow, when something caught his attention overhead. A red glow, faint at first, hovering among the stars. It didn't dart or streak across the sky like a meteor. It didn't blink like an aircraft. It simply remained, suspended, as if resting. He watched it for several seconds. Then, like any practical man with work to finish, he dismissed it. Rural skies are full of illusions, distant fires, reflections, tired eyes. Antonio returned to his tractor and thought no more about it. At least, that's what he told himself. But the light returned. Not every night. Not predictably, just often enough to settle into his awareness, like a question that refused to be answered. Sometimes it appeared low on the horizon. Other times it glowed higher, closer to the stars. Always red, always steady, always lingering longer than felt natural. Antonio did not tell anyone. What would he say? That a strange light was watching his fields. That the sky seemed interested. The words sounded foolish even in his own head. He kept working, kept living, kept assuming that whatever it was would eventually stop appearing. It didn't. Instead, Antonio began to notice something else. The fields, once comforting in their emptiness, started to feel attentive. The darkness no longer felt neutral. There were moments when he caught himself looking over his shoulder, not because he was afraid, but because something in him expected to see movement where there had never been movement before. Have you ever had that sensation? Not fear, not certainty, just the sense of being noticed. The stars themselves seemed sharper on those nights, the sky deeper, the silence more deliberate. Antonio found himself watching the red light longer each time it appeared, studying it the way one studies an unfamiliar animal, curious, cautious, unwilling to approach too closely. He noticed how it moved, or rather, how it didn't. It didn't drift with the wind. It didn't wobble or flicker. When it changed position, it did so smoothly, intentionally, as if guided by an unseen hand. Sometimes it would lower slightly, then rise again, like something testing boundaries. Once, it vanished abruptly. Antonio stood there for a long moment afterward, staring at the empty sky, his heart beating faster than he expected. The absence felt louder than the light itself. Still, he said nothing. He was not a man given to speculation. He had been raised to trust what could be touched, measured, harvested. Lights in the sky did not plow fields or feed families. They did not deserve attention. And yet, on the night of October 15th, when Antonio prepared to work after sunset, the air felt heavier from the start. The heat lingered closer to the ground. The insects were louder, then suddenly quieter, as if their chorus had lost confidence. As he guided the tractor into the field, he glanced upward without thinking. The red light was already there. This time, it was closer. Not dramatically so, just enough that Antonio felt a tightening in his chest he couldn't ignore. The glow was brighter than before, deeper in color, as though it had gathered strength. He slowed the tractor slightly, watching it from the corner of his eye. Just a light, he told himself, but something about its patience unsettled him. It did not rush. It did not hide. It waited. As the tractor moved forward, the light adjusted its position, staying within view, not chasing, not retreating, simply present, like a companion matching pace. Without being invited, Antonio's thoughts began to wander in unfamiliar directions. Why here? Why now? Why always when I am alone? The questions surfaced quietly, without panic, without answers. He felt a strange pull between two instincts. The desire to ignore the light completely, and the equally strong urge to watch it closely, as if looking away might allow something important to slip past unnoticed. Minutes passed, then the light began to descend. At first, the movement was so subtle, it was almost imperceptible. The glow seemed to grow slightly larger, its edges more defined. Antonio eased his foot off the accelerator again, the tractor's rhythm slowing as his attention shifted fully upward. The descent felt measured, careful. The red glow no longer blended with the stars. It separated itself clearly, hovering lower, closer to the field. Antonio could now see that it wasn't just a point of light. It had shape, depth, presence. The air seemed to thicken around him. His mouth felt dry. He swallowed and forced himself to breathe steadily. Fear still hadn't fully arrived, not the kind that sends you running. This was something quieter, a recognition that the night was no longer behaving according to familiar rules. The light stopped, hovered, waited. Antonio's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His senses sharpened. Every sound, the tractor engine, the distant insects. His own breathing felt amplified, as though the world had leaned in closer. And then, without warning, the engine sputtered. Just once. A warning cough. Antonio's stomach dropped. He looked down instinctively, then back up at the red glow, which remained exactly where it was, unwavering. The timing felt wrong, too precise, the kind of precision that does not belong to coincidence. The tractor coughed again, then everything went still. The engine fell silent. The headlights dimmed and died. The familiar mechanical heartbeat vanished, leaving behind a void so sudden it seemed to echo. Antonio sat motionless. The red light did not move. It hovered there, calm and unwavering, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. And in that heavy, unnatural silence, Antonio understood something without fully forming the thought. This was no longer just a light in the sky. Whatever it was, it had crossed a boundary, and it was no longer content to be watched from a distance. The night held its breath, and the next moment would take him somewhere he could not yet imagine. Chapter 3. When silence replaced the engine, the silence arrived faster than fear. One moment, the tractor had been alive beneath Antônio Villas. Boas metal vibrating, engine breathing, the familiar reassurance of sound and motion. The next, it was nothing more than cold weight and stillness, a machine stripped of its purpose. The night rushed in to fill the gap, thick and absolute. Antonio sat there longer than he realized. He did not move at first. He listened. In the countryside, silence is rarely complete. Even in the deepest night, there are insects, distant animals, the soft language of wind moving through grass. But this was different. The sounds that remained felt pushed to the edges, muted, as though the field itself had drawn inward. He turned the key again. Nothing. No cough. No spark. No resistance. The tractor responded as if it were no longer connected to him at all. Antonio rested his forehead briefly against the steering wheel, breathing slowly, grounding himself in the familiar smell of oil and dust. Machines fail, he told himself, even trusted ones. Yet the thought refused to settle. He climbed down from the tractor, boots touching soil that felt unchanged beneath him, though everything else had shifted. The ground was solid, real. He pressed his heel into it slightly, as if to confirm that gravity still worked the way it always had. Above him, the red light hovered. It was closer now, casting a faint glow across the field. The light did not pulse or flicker. It held steady, unwavering, painting the earth in soft crimson tones. Shadows stretched outward from Antonio's body, long and distorted, sliding gently as the glow shifted its angle. He tilted his head back, eyes fixed on it. The object no longer felt distant enough to dismiss. It occupied the sky with intention, its presence undeniable. Antonio felt his heart beat faster, each thump loud in his ears, as if trying to remind him that he was still here, still alive. Have you ever noticed how silence makes every thought louder? Questions crowded in, overlapping, unfinished. Why isn't it moving? Why now? Why here? He glanced back at the tractor, then at the field beyond it. The farmhouse was far away, barely visible in the darkness. Running crossed his mind, not as a plan, but as a reflex. A word his body recognized, even if his mind had not yet caught up. He took a cautious step away from the tractor. Nothing happened. Another step. The red light remained still, watching. The air felt heavier now, pressing gently against his skin. It wasn't wind. There was no breeze, just a sensation of density, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the atmosphere holds too much energy. Antonio swallowed. He told himself he would walk toward the farmhouse. Slowly, calmly. There was no reason to panic. Whatever the light was, it had not harmed him. It had simply followed. But as he turned his body, something shifted. Movement. Not in the sky, but closer. Antonio Frose's shapes emerged at the edge of the red glow, stepping into view with quiet certainty. They were smaller than he expected, their forms compact and symmetrical. Their movements were smooth, economical, free of hesitation. They did not rush. They did not sneak. They advanced as if distance were merely a formality. Antonio's breath caught sharply in his throat. For a brief moment, his mind rejected what his eyes were showing him. It searched desperately for familiar explanations. Men in suits, workers, soldiers, something that belonged to the world he understood. But the longer he looked, the less those comparisons held. Their proportions were wrong. Their helmets reflected the red light without revealing anything beneath. Their suits clung closely, smooth and seamless, as if grown rather than worn. There were no visible tools, no insignia, no features that offered comfort. Just motion. Purposeful. Directed. This time, fear arrived. Not explosive, not dramatic. It crept in quietly, tightening his chest, shortening his breath. Antonio turned and ran. His boots struck the soil hard, uneven ground, slowing him almost immediately. The distance he covered felt pitifully short. Strong hands closed around his arms, firm and unyielding. The grip was colder than he expected, sending a sharp jolt through him. He shouted. The sound vanished into the night. The beings made brief, sharp noises, sounds that did not carry emotion, only function. Antonio struggled, his muscles burning, his heart hammering wildly now. But the grip did not change. It did not tighten in anger or loosen in response to his efforts. It simply remained. Resistance, he realized, was not part of the equation. He was turned gently but firmly toward the source of the red glow. Up close, the object was larger than it had appeared from a distance. It rested above the ground on 3 extended legs, balanced with effortless precision. Its surface was smooth and metallic, reflecting the field, the stars, and the struggling man below in distorted curves. The section along its side began to open. Not with sound, not with force. It parted smoothly, revealing a ladder descending toward the earth. Antonio stared at it, his thoughts scattering. Ladders were familiar things, tools for barns, silos, everyday work. This one felt like an invitation he did not remember agreeing to. He tried once more to pull away. The beings adjusted their grip, not roughly, but decisively. There was no malice in the motion, only inevitability. Rung by rung, he was guided upward. With each step, the ground fell farther away. The field, the soil, the tractor, the life he knew, slipped below him, receding into darkness. The air grew cooler as he climbed, the red glow softening into a more diffuse light. At the top of the ladder, he hesitated. For a fraction of a second, he looked back. The night stretched wide and empty beneath him, unchanged except for his absence. The stars remained distant and indifferent. Nothing in the landscape suggested that anything extraordinary was happening. And then he crossed the threshold. Inside, the world transformed. The air carried a sharp, unfamiliar scent, clean, sterile, edged with something he could not identify. The light was soft and even, illuminating smooth, curved walls without seams or corners. The space felt enclosed yet expansive, as if its dimensions were not immediately obvious. The ladder retracted behind him. Antonio stood very still, his breathing shallow, his senses overwhelmed. There were no windows, no visible controls, no indication of direction or movement. The interior hummed faintly, not a sound exactly, but a sensation, like standing near a powerful machine, just beyond hearing range. The beings guided him forward. His clothes were removed quickly, efficiently, without ceremony. He felt exposed, vulnerable, his mind scrambling to keep pace with what his body was experiencing. A thick substance was applied to his skin, cool, smooth, spreading evenly across his arms and chest. It felt strangely calming, dulling the sharpest edges of panic without erasing awareness. He wanted to speak. No words came. Something pressed beneath his chin. A brief, sharp pain flared, then faded. Antonio gasped involuntarily. He did not see what was taken, only felt the certainty that something had been removed. Then the gas appeared, gray, heavy, seeping into the air around him. It pressed into his lungs, thickening each breath. Nausea surged, folding him inward as his body reacted violently. His vision blurred, his thoughts scattered, slipping out of sequence. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched. Minutes collapsed. Antonio drifted, then snapped back into awareness, over and over, caught between consciousness and something softer, more distant. The beings watched without expression, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the examination paused. The others withdrew. The space grew quieter, and in that strange, softened light, Antonio sensed that something or someone else was about to enter. The silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt expectant. Chapter 4. Shapes that stepped out of the light. The quiet inside the craft was different from the silence of the field. Outside, silence had weight. It pressed down from the sky, filled with distance and unseen life. Inside this place, the quiet felt controlled, intentional, as if sound itself were permitted only when necessary. Antônio Villas Boas lay still, his breathing shallow, his thoughts drifting in slow, uncertain circles. He sensed movement before he saw it. Not footsteps. Not noise, just a subtle shift in the air, like pressure changing before a storm. His eyes, still struggling to focus clearly, tracked the motion instinctively. The figures were returning. They emerged from the curved edges of the chamber one by one, their forms resolving slowly in the soft, even light. Up close, they were smaller than he had first imagined, compact, efficient, built without excess. Their suits clung closely to their bodies, smooth and seamless, reflecting the light without glare. No folds, no seams, no markings to distinguish one from another. They did not hurry. They did not hesitate. They moved with the calm certainty of beings who had done this before. Antonio felt his chest tightened, not with sudden fear, but with the realization that he was no longer reacting to the unknown. He was inside it. There was no edge to retreat to, no familiar object to anchor himself to. The tractor, the field, the stars, all of it felt impossibly far away now. One of the beings raised an arm. The gesture was small, precise. The others adjusted their positions immediately, responding without delay, without discussion. It was not communication as Antonio understood it, but coordination so smooth it barely registered as movement. Have you ever watched a flock of birds change direction all at once? No signal you can see. No pause. Just shared intention. That was how these beings moved. Antonio tried to sit up. His muscles responded sluggishly, as though wrapped in resistance. The gel on his skin had dried slightly, leaving a faint sheen that caught the light. He became acutely aware of his own body of breath entering and leaving his lungs, of his heart beating steadily despite everything. Despite everything. One of the figures stepped closer. Up close, the helmet reflected his own face back at him, distorted and pale. He searched the surface for something: eyes, expression, any hint of recognition, but there was nothing. The helmet offered no answers. A hand reached out. Antonio flinched instinctively. The touch was brief. Light. Almost reassuring. It rested against his arm for a moment. Then withdrew. There was no pain in it, no force. The being seemed to be checking something, confirming a condition he did not understand. A low sound vibrated through the chamber. It wasn't loud, but Antonio felt it more than he heard it. A gentle hum that settled into his chest. His breathing slowed without conscious effort. The sharp edges of panic soft, not disappearing, but loosening their grip. This, he realized dimly, was intentional. They were not trying to frighten him. That thought unsettled him more than fear would have. Because if they weren't trying to scare him, then... What are they doing? The beings moved around him, adjusting instruments he did not recognize, surfaces that lit briefly beneath their hands, then faded again. The room itself seemed to respond to their presence, subtle shifts in light and tone following their movements. Antonio's sense of time continued to slip. He could not tell how long he lay there. Minutes, hours, something in between. His thoughts wandered to strange places. The farmhouse, his family, the quiet routines of his life that suddenly felt fragile, easily interrupted. Would they notice if he didn't return before dawn? Would the fields look the same when he stood in them again? One of the beings turned slightly, its helmet angled toward a different section of the chamber. A doorway, if it could be called that, opened without sound, revealing another space beyond. Something stirred in Antonio then, not fear, anticipation. The beings withdrew again, stepping back in smooth, measured movements. The hum faded. The chamber grew still. Antonio was left alone once more, lying beneath the soft glow, his thoughts slow and heavy. He stared upward, eyes tracing the gentle curve of the ceiling. The craft felt alive, not alive in the way animals are alive. Not breathing, not pulsing, but responsive. A place that adjusted itself around intention, around purpose. It did not feel hostile. It felt prepared for him. The doorway remained open. Light spilled through it, slightly warmer than the glow in the chamber. Antonio sensed, rather than saw, that something was approaching from beyond. His pulse quickened again, steady but insistent, like a drum beginning to mark time. Footsteps did not announce the arrival. She simply appeared. She moved into the chamber with a fluidity that drew his attention immediately. Where the others were uniform and enclosed, she was open, exposed, undeniably different. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, reflecting the light softly rather than sharply. Her movements were slower, more deliberate, as if time behaved differently around her. Antonio's breath caught, her eyes met his. They were large, slanted, and a vivid blue, unlike anything he had seen before. Not cold, not warm, just intensely present. They did not flicker or dart. They held his gaze with steady focus, as if she were studying him as carefully as he was studying her. She did not speak. She did not smile. She stepped closer. Antonio felt a rush of sensations collide within him: confusion, vulnerability, a deep, unsettling awareness of being seen, not observed. Seen, as though something about him, something beneath the surface, was being quietly examined. She stopped at the edge of the platform. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but dense with unspoken meaning. Antonio became aware of his own breathing again, of the steady rhythm of his heart. He realized he was no longer struggling to move. His body felt calm, responsive, present. She reached out. Her touch was warm. The contrast startled him. He had expected cold, something clinical. Instead, the warmth grounded him, tethered him to the physical reality of the moment. Her hand rested against his chest briefly, as if feeling the rhythm there. Ten withdrew. Her expression did not change. But something in the air shifted. The beings in the background remained still, their presence distant now, secondary. This moment belonged to the two of them. What followed unfolded without urgency, without violence, without tenderness as humans define it. It felt purposeful, deliberate, guided by a logic Antonio could not grasp but instinctively sensed. He did not feel coerced, yet he did not feel fully in control. It was as though the moment existed outside the familiar boundaries of choice. Later, he would struggle to find language for it. How do you describe an experience that feels both intimate and impersonal? Both gentle and unsettling, both unforgettable and strangely muted. And that she stepped back. She placed a hand against her abdomen. The gesture was simple, unmistakable. Then she lifted her gaze upward, toward the ceiling, toward the space beyond the craft, toward the stars that lay far above the fields of Minas Gerais. The message settled into Antonio slowly. Not spoken, not explained. Understood. Something had been initiated. A continuation, a connection that reached beyond him, beyond the night, beyond the land he knew so well. She turned and moved away, her form disappearing back through the doorway without hesitation. The chamber returned to its previous stillness, the soft light unchanged, the beings once again receding into the background. Antonio lay there, staring upward, his thoughts quiet, heavy, rearranging themselves around a new center. He did not know what would happen next. He only knew that whatever had brought him here had not been random. The shapes that stepped out of the light were no longer just figures in the dark. They were participants in something larger. And he, whether he understood it or not, had become one of them. Chapter 5. The Ladder Back to the Sky. For a long moment after she was gone, nothing happened. Antônio Villas Boas lay beneath the soft, even glow, his body heavy yet strangely calm. The chamber felt larger now, as if the space itself had expanded after her departure. The air carried the same faint, sterile scent, but something else lingered beneath it, an afterimage of presence, subtle and difficult to name. He stared upward, following the gentle curve of the ceiling. His thoughts moved slowly, like objects drifting underwater. The sharp edges of panic had dissolved, leaving behind a quiet disbelief that wrapped around him instead. If this was a dream, it was far too steady. Dreams blur at the edges. They slip when examined too closely. This place did neither. It remained. The beings reappeared, without announcement. They emerged from the same curved surfaces as before, their movements smooth and coordinated. Antonio noticed, dimly, how little sound they made. No footsteps. No mechanical hum, just motion. Precise and economical. One of them approached. Antonio tensed slightly, his muscles responding before his mind could decide how to feel. The being paused, as if sensing the change in him, then placed a hand lightly against his arm. The touch was brief, almost reassuring. The tension eased. A signal passed among them, an imperceptible exchange. Then they stepped back. The platform beneath Antonio shifted, not abruptly, not enough to startle him. It lowered slightly, adjusting its position until he could sit up comfortably. His movements felt more natural now. The heaviness in his limbs had faded, replaced by a cautious awareness. He swung his legs over the edge and stood. The floor beneath his feet felt solid, warm, faintly textured. He pressed his weight into it deliberately, grounding himself. Gravity still worked. Balance still mattered. These simple confirmations brought an unexpected sense of relief. One of the beings gestured toward the far end of the chamber. A section of the wall parted, revealing a passageway illuminated by softer light. Antonio hesitated, then took a step forward. No hands guided him this time. No pressure urged him on. The choice, if it could be called that, felt quietly his. He walked. The corridor curved gently, its walls smooth and seamless. As he moved, the light adjusted subtly, brightening ahead of him, dimming behind. The sensation reminded him of walking with a lantern at night, except the lantern was the space itself. At the end of the passage, the space opened. Antonio found himself standing near an opening that led directly outside. There was no sudden rush of air, no blast of sound, just the familiar night, waiting. Beyond the threshold, the field stretched out below him, bathed in faint starlight. The tractor sat exactly where he had left it, dark and lifeless. The land looked unchanged, and yet it felt impossibly distant, like a photograph of a place he remembered rather than a place he could reach. A ladder extended downward from the craft, the same ladder he had climbed earlier. Seeing it now stirred something deep in Antonio's chest, a sense of return, of closing a circle that had been left open. The beings stood behind him, their presence steady, unobtrusive. No words were exchanged, no explanations offered. Antonio stepped onto the ladder. Each rung felt solid beneath his feet, cool against his skin. As he descended, the craft above him remained utterly still, balanced effortlessly in the air. He did not feel rushed. He did not feel pushed. Halfway down, he paused. He looked up. The craft loomed quietly above, its surface reflecting the stars in soft curves. There were no windows, no visible means of propulsion. It did not roar or vibrate. It simply existed, suspended between sky and earth, as though the two had briefly agreed to share it. Antonio felt a pull then, not to climb back up, but to remember. To fix this image in his mind before it slipped away. The ladder. The field. The impossible object hovering in silence. He continued downward. When his boots touched the soil, the sensation surprised him. The earth felt firmer than he remembered, cooler, more real. He bent slightly, pressing his hand against the ground, feeling grains of dirt cling to his skin. The beings remained above. The ladder began to retract, smooth and unhurried, folding back into the craft until it disappeared entirely. Antonio straightened, watching, his heart beating steadily now. The craft rose. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It lifted as if released from an invisible hold, ascending with calm precision. The red glow intensified briefly, bathing the field in warm light, then softened as the craft climbed higher. Antonio shielded his eyes slightly, tracking its movement as it rose above the field, above the trees, above the quiet outline of the farmhouse in the distance. The glow shrank, the shape becoming less distinct, until it blended once more with the vastness of the sky. Then it was gone. No explosion of sound, no trail. Just absence. The stars reclaimed their place. The night returned to its familiar patterns. Crickets resuming their song, the distant rustle of leaves, the slow breath of the land. It was as though the field exhaled, releasing something it had been holding. Antonio stood alone. He looked around, half expecting the world to feel different in obvious ways. But the field was the same. The soil unchanged, the tractor still silent, its dark shape waiting. And yet, something fundamental had shifted. He approached the tractor and tried the engine again. Nothing. He rested his hands on the hood, feeling the cool metal beneath his palms. His body felt heavy now, in a different way. Not sedated, but exhausted, as though he had traveled a great distance without moving at all. The walk back to the farmhouse felt longer than usual. Each step carried a strange duality. Part of him focused on the simple mechanics of movement, the crunch of soil beneath his boots, the steady rhythm of his breath. Another part replayed fragments of what had happened, testing them for weakness, for signs they might dissolve into It did not. When he reached the house, the door creaked softly as he entered. The interior was dark and quiet, exactly as he had left it. He sat down slowly, pressing his back against the wall, and closed his eyes. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it was shallow and fragmented, filled with shifting light and distant sensations rather than images. His body ached. His skin felt sensitive, as though it remembered touch long after it had ended. By morning, the sun rose, as it always had. Light spilled across the fields. Birds called. Life resumed its steady rhythm. Anyone watching from a distance would have seen nothing unusual. But Antonio knew better, because standing there, alone in the quiet aftermath, he understood something with unsettling clarity. He had been returned, but he had not been restored, and the sky above the fields of Minas Gerais, vast and indifferent once more, no longer felt empty in the same way it had before. Chapter 6. The mark the morning could not explain. Morning arrived gently, as if careful not to disturb him. Sunlight slid through the thin gaps in the farmhouse walls, laying pale stripes across the floor. Dust drifted lazily in the air, glowing for a moment before settling again. Everything looked ordinary. Comfortingly so. Antônio Villas Boas woke slowly. At first, he did not move. He lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of the farm coming back to life. The distant call of birds, the faint movement of animals outside, the low murmur of wind brushing against crops. His body felt heavy, as if sleep had not fully released him yet. Then memory surfaced, not all at once, not like a sudden shock. It rose quietly, piece by piece, like mist lifting from the ground. The red light, the silence, the ladder. His eyes opened. For a moment, he stared at the ceiling, his breath shallow, his heart steady but alert. The night felt close, not gone, as though it had folded itself neatly and placed itself just out of sight. He sat up slowly. That was when he felt it. A deep soreness pulsed through his body, centered low in his abdomen, spreading outward in dull waves. He winced, instinctively pressing a hand against himself. The pain was not sharp, but it was insistent, undeniable, real. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood, steadying himself against the wall. The floor felt solid beneath his feet. Familiar. Safe. And yet his body told a different story. He walked to the small wash basin near the door. The water was cold as he splashed it over his face, the shock bringing him fully awake. He looked up into the mirror and froze. Marks. They were unmistakable. Small punctures, arranged carefully, symmetrically. Unlike anything he had seen before, the skin around them was slightly discolored, tender to the touch. He leaned closer, studying Tem, hoping desperately to recognize them as something ordinary. An insect bite. A rash. An accident he had forgotten, but none of those explanations fit. His stomach tightened. He straightened and examined the rest of his body. More signs revealed themselves. Faint abrasions, subtle discolorations. Areas of sensitivity that had no place in his memory of the previous day's work. This was not the soreness of labor. This was something else. Antônio stepped back from the mirror, his reflection staring at him with quiet accusation. The man looking back seemed the same, yet not entirely. His eyes carried something new, a depth shaped by questions that did not yet have answers. Outside, the farm waited. He dressed slowly and stepped into the morning light. The sun felt warmer than usual on his skin, almost too bright. Every sound seemed amplified, as though his senses had been finely tuned overnight. He walked toward the field. The tractor still sat where it had been abandoned, motionless and silent. He ran a hand along its side, half expecting it to react now, to hum back to life, as if nothing had happened. It did not. The field looked undisturbed. No scorch marks, no broken plants, no impressions in the soil where the craft had hovered. The land offered no evidence, no confirmation that anything unusual had taken place, except him. Antônio stood there for a long time, scanning the sky. It was empty now, vast and blue, dotted only with drifting clouds. If something had been watching, it had retreated beyond sight. Or perhaps it never left. That thought settled quietly in his chest. Later that day, he tried to return to his routine. Chores needed doing. Animals needed care. Life demanded attention, indifferent to internal upheaval. He worked slowly, carefully, aware of every movement his body made. Neighbors passed by, exchanging greetings. He responded automatically, his voice steady, his expression controlled. No one seemed to notice anything different. And yet, inside, Antônio felt suspended between two realities. One was solid and familiar. The farm, the soil, the rhythm of rural life. The other hovered just beneath the surface, luminous and unsettling, refusing to fade into imagination. By afternoon, the discomfort intensified. The pain returned in waves, accompanied by nausea and a strange, lingering fatigue. He sat down heavily on a bench, wiping sweat from his brow. His thoughts drifted again to the interior of the craft. The sterile air, the smooth walls, the quiet precision of the beings. Had it all truly happened? Or was his mind creating meaning where there was none? He considered saying nothing. It would be easy, he thought, to carry this alone. To let the marks fade, the memories soften, until the experience became just another strange night that time would eventually blur. But something inside him resisted that idea. The memories were too clear. The sensations too specific. The marks too deliberate. As the evening approached, Antônio made a decision. He would speak. Not to everyone. Not dramatically. But to someone who might listen without immediate dismissal. Someone who could help him understand whether what he had experienced had a place in the world beyond his own mind. That night, as the sky darkened once more, he sat quietly and wrote down everything he could remember. He described the light, the silence, the beings, the interior of the craft. He wrote slowly, carefully, as if afraid the details might escape if he rushed. Each word anchored the experience more firmly in reality. When he finished, he sat back and stared at the pages. The act of writing did not bring relief, but it brought clarity. Because now, the experience existed outside of him, and the night, stretching endlessly beyond the farmhouse windows, felt once again full of possibilities. Some revealed, others still waiting, patient and unseen. The sky, Antônio realized, had not changed. Chapter 7. Seeking understanding in the ordinary. The days that followed moved slowly, each one folding into the next, like a quiet stream gliding over smooth stones. Antônio Villas Boas returned to the rhythm of farm life, the plow cutting furrows, the steady movement of animals, the sun climbing high into the Minas Gerais sky. But the ordinary world felt different now, subtly altered by what had transpired. At first, he tried to ignore the memory of the night, to push the vivid sensations into a shadowed corner of his mind, yet they returned unbidden. The red light, the silent beings, the ladder stretching down from the sky. The calm precision of their movements they did not fade with time. Each detail returned with startling clarity, a gentle insistence that he could not dismiss. He found himself pausing mid-task, his hands frozen on the plow handles, listening intently to the fields around him. Even the softest whisper of wind carried the echo of the night, a rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the faint hum of insects all reminded him that life outside his consciousness continued, but that he had crossed into a space no one else had seen. Curiosity began to creep forward. He remembered the moments inside the craft, how it had seemed alive, aware, responsive, how it had guided him without speaking, without instruction, and yet with complete clarity. And then there were the beings small, deliberate, unhurried, and the one who had stepped forward from the light. The memory of her gaze lingered most vividly. Large, blue, unwavering, and calm. What did it mean, he wondered, if anyone else had ever experienced something similar? The thought led him to the small library at home, dusty shelves filled with magazines, newspapers, and pamphlets from the nearby town. He pulled out old copies of O Cruzeiro, remembering the magazine's occasional reports on lights in the sky, and strange sightings in Minas Gerais. Some of the articles were sensationalized, others skeptical, but all seemed to hint at a world just beyond ordinary perception, a world he now knew existed. He read, reread, and compared, scribbling notes in the margins, questioning each detail. What were coincidences? What were clues? He found patterns in the stories. Strange lights, sudden disappearances, unexplained marks, unusual sensations. Some were near the city of Belo Horizonte, others scattered across the remote countryside, but all shared a quiet insistence that the night might hold more than it appeared. Yet knowledge was not comfort. Antônio's nights were restless. He awoke several times, heart pounding, mind half caught in the images of the previous encounter. The sensation of the ladder, the hush of the chamber, the warmth of her touch, they resurfaced unbidden. Sometimes he would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to anchor himself in the ordinary sounds of his home. The low creak of the wooden beams, the distant hoot of an owl, the wind brushing against the tiled roof. But the quiet carried another sound too, an echo of possibility. Could it happen again? Would he see the craft once more? Were the beings watching, waiting, Or had they simply moved on? The questions settled in his chest, heavy yet not oppressive, like stones submerged in slow-moving water. They demanded attention, reflection, but not panic. In seeking understanding, he reached out, cautiously. He began speaking to a few trusted neighbors, choosing his words carefully. He described the night in fragments, testing reactions, noting disbelief, skepticism, even amusement. Few took him seriously. Some offered excuses: fatigue, overwork, stress. Others simply shook their heads, and yet a handful listened with patient curiosity, nodding, asking gentle questions. Their responses, measured and calm, gave him permission to articulate the experience without fear of immediate rejection. One evening, he sought counsel from a physician. Dr. Labofontes, a man reputed for examining unusual cases with discretion and scientific rigor. From him in the modest office in Rio de Janeiro, Antônio recounted what he could: the craft, the beings, the sensations, the marks on his skin. Dr. Fontes observed quietly, noting physical details, asking precise questions, never dismissing what was described, yet maintaining professional restraint. The examination revealed what he had already suspected: minor lesions, small punctures, redness, and tenderness, consistent with what he had felt. But the explanation remained elusive. Nothing in medicine could explain the source, nor did it identify an ordinary cause. The findings confirmed the reality of his experience. Without clarifying its origin, Antônio left the office. With a quiet understanding, the world might not provide all answers, yet evidence small, physical, undeniable, existed. He had passed from private astonishment into something that straddled both personal reality and public scrutiny. The farm became his refuge and his mirror. Walking the fields, tending the crops, watching the animals, he sought both normalcy and perspective. Nature, steady and indifferent, reminded him that life continued despite moments that defied comprehension. Each sunrise reaffirmed order. Each gentle wind whispered continuity. And yet, he felt the subtle pull of the extraordinary, like a faint light glimmering at the edge of the horizon, waiting for him to notice. He began recording his memories more formally. Every detail: the red glow, the ladder, the beings, the examination. Her gesture toward the stars was written with deliberate care. He described not only what had happened, but how it had felt. The weight of touch, the sensations in his body, the strange calm that came with the unspoken guidance of beings who did not belong to the world he knew. Writing became both anchor and compass. It allowed him to explore the nuances of the experience without losing himself. He noticed patterns he had not before: the precise timing of events, the continuity of sensations, the delicate interactions. The process sharpened his awareness of the night, of silence, of space. He realized that observation alone could be a form of understanding, a way to bridge the known and the unknown. And yet, curiosity remained. Could anyone else comprehend it fully? Was the event uniquely his? Did it connect to the others he had read about, the faint hints scattered across magazines and local rumors? The questions were gentle, insistent, like a whisper along the edge of sleep, nudging him forward without demanding resolution. The boundaries between ordinary life and extraordinary events began to blur. Antônio noticed himself pausing more often at night, looking at the sky. Each star, each drifting cloud, carried the subtle tension of possibility. He wondered if the world held more of these moments, just out of reach, quietly shaping lives in ways most would never perceive. And in that wonder, a new calm emerged. He began to accept the duality of his life, the ordinary and the extraordinary coexisting, overlapping like layers of a gentle landscape. The fields could be familiar and alien at once. The tractor could remain silent, yet the memory of its failure could awaken awe. The stars above Minas Gerais could be indifferent yet carry traces of presence he had felt personally. This acceptance did not erase the questions, but it softened them. It allowed him to move through his days without panic, without obsession, yet with the clarity of someone who had glimpsed something beyond the ordinary. He tended the crops, he cared for the animals, he spoke gently to neighbors. He wrote his experiences carefully, all while the memory of that night to light, the ladder, the beings remained a quiet, luminous thread weaving through the fabric of his life. And so, life continued. But Antônio Villas Boas no longer walked through it entirely alone. Part of him had crossed into the unknown, touched something beyond comprehension, and returned. That part lingered, gentle yet insistent. A reminder that ordinary days could hold extraordinary possibilities, waiting only to be recognized. The night had not left him. It had followed him quietly, like a shadow at the edge of light, and he had learned, in his own careful way, to lead it, to observe, to wonder, to remain alert to what might come next. And above all, he had learned that the ordinary could be transformed by a single, extraordinary encounter. Subtle, unhurried, yet undeniable. The stars would rise again tonight, and he would be ready to see them differently. Chapter 8. The Woman with the Unfamiliar Eyes. The chamber did not feel cold. That was the first thing Antônio Villas Boas would later remember when he tried to describe her. After the methodical examination, after the strange instruments and the silent coordination of the small suited beings, the room had settled into a quiet stillness. The hum in the walls softened. The air no longer carried the heavy weight of the gas. It felt prepared. Antônio sat upright now, his body no longer resisting him. The soreness was there, faint but real, like the memory of pressure rather than pain. His thoughts had cleared enough to register details again. The gentle curvature of the walls, the seamless floor, the light that seemed to exist without source, and then the others withdrew. They did not rush out. They did not turn their backs in retreat. They simply stepped aside. The opening in the wall widened. She entered alone. She was not dressed like the others, where they were enclosed, hidden behind smooth helmets and metallic suits. She was uncovered, exposed in a way that made the room feel suddenly smaller. Her skin was pale, almost luminous beneath the soft glow. Not translucent, not fragile, just different, like light reflected off porcelain. Antônio's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were the first thing that held him. Large, slanted, a striking, unmistakable blue. Not the blue of the sky over Minas Gerais, not the blue of river water. This was deeper, clearer, intent. She did not blink immediately. She looked at him as though measuring something beyond height or weight, as if she were assessing not just his body but his presence. Have you ever felt someone look at you in a way that makes you suddenly aware of your own heartbeat? That was how it felt. His pulse grew louder in his ears, yet strangely, fear did not surge the way it had before. There was no violent instinct to run. No sharp panic. What replaced it was something far more unsettling. Awareness. She stepped closer. Her movements were fluid, unhurried. There was no hesitation in her stride. No uncertain. Each step seemed already decided long before it was taken. Her hair framed her head lightly, pale in tone. But what struck Antônio most was the vivid red hair at her body, a detail so specific, so human, and yet so foreign in context, that it anchored the moment in disturbing clarity. This was not a faceless being in armor. This was an individual. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the fine texture of her skin, close enough that he could feel warmth radiating from her. Warmth. That surprised him. Everything else in the craft had felt controlled, measured, neutral, but her presence carried heat subtle, alive. She raised a hand. For a split second, Antônio flinched. The memory of instruments and punctures lingered too near the surface, but her touch, when it came, was not sharp. It was gentle. Her palm rested against his chest, over his heart. The contact lasted only a few seconds, yet it stretched into something far longer inside him. His breathing slowed. The tension in his shoulders eased. The air itself felt thicker, quieter. She was not smiling. There was no tenderness in the human sense. But there was intention. What followed unfolded without words, without discussion, without negotiation as humans understand it. There was no violence, no struggle. Yet neither was there romance. It felt purposeful, detached from emotion, yet heavy with meaning. Antônio would later struggle to explain this part more than any other. How could something feel intimate and impersonal at the same time? How could an act carry no visible cruelty, yet still leave a deep tremor in the mind? The beings in the background remained still, observing without interference. Their role seemed complete. This moment belonged to her, and to him. Time blurred again. Not in confusion this time, but in compression. The edges of the chamber softened. The light remained constant. Her gaze occasionally lifted to meet his, steady and unwavering. He did not understand the reason, but he felt that this was not random. This was not curiosity. This was designed when it ended. She stepped back. The distance between them returned, but the air had changed. She placed her hand on her abdomen. The gesture was slow, deliberate. Then she lifted her gaze upward, toward the curved ceiling of the craft, and beyond it, toward the sky he knew. Toward the stars. The message did not require language. It settled into him with chilling clarity. Continuation. Creation. Something had been initiated. Not for him alone. Not for her alone, but beyond them both. Antônio felt his throat tighten. A strange mixture of confusion and realization washed through him. He did not fully comprehend the implications, but instinct told him that this encounter extended into the future in ways he could not see. She held his gaze one final time. There was no affection in her expression. No apology. No reassurance. Only certainty. Then she turned. Her movements were as fluid in departure as they had been in arrival. She passed through the opening in the wall, and the surface sealed behind her seamlessly, erasing all trace of passage. The chamber returned to its earlier stillness. The hum resumed faintly. The suited beings approached once more, not aggressively, not urgently. Their task appeared to be continuing a process already completed. Antônio sat there breathing slowly, staring at the space where she had stood. The warmth of her touch still lingered faintly against his skin. For the first time since the red light had descended over his fields, a different kind of fear crept in, not fear of harm, but fear of implication. If her gesture meant what he believed it meant, then this night was not simply an encounter. It was part of something larger, something that would outlive the silence of this craft. Outlive the red glow, outlive even the memory of the ladder descending from the sky. He felt very small in that moment, not powerless, but woven into a design he had never asked to understand, and somewhere far above the fields of Minas Gerais, beyond the curve of the earth, the stars remained distant and indifferent. Watching, waiting, unfamiliar eyes had met his, and nothing about the sky would ever feel empty again. Chapter 9. Whispers between the stars. The nights grew longer as the season shifted, stretching shadows across the fields in slow, deliberate movements. Antônio Villas Boas often found himself lingering outside after completing his chores, feeling the cool soil beneath his feet, listening to the delicate rhythm of nocturnal life. Crickets called, owls observed silently from distant trees, and a gentle breeze traced lines across the cornfields. The farm seemed ordinary enough, yet to Antônio it carried a subtle vibrancy, as if the very air remembered the night he had touched the extraordinary. He had come to understand that the experience was not simply an event, it was a lens. Every light that flickered in the distance, every pattern in the wind, every reflective shimmer of water in the moonlight, now hinted at unseen rhythms, unseen presences. The sky had become more than a backdrop. It was an active participant, a canvas upon which both ordinary and extraordinary movements unfolded. Sometimes, when he looked upward, he imagined conversations being exchanged there. Silent exchanges, perhaps not of words, but of intentions. He thought of the beings he had encountered, small yet precise, deliberate yet calm. What had they learned from him? What had they hoped he might carry away? The questions did not unsettle him. Rather, they expanded his attention, sharpening his sense of observation, patience, and curiosity. One night, while walking the boundary of the field, he noticed a faint shift in the stars. A subtle alignment, unusual in its symmetry, caused his breath to catch. He paused, tilting his head, studying the pattern. It persisted for a long moment, and then the stars resumed their ordinary arrangement, leaving him to wonder if his perception had changed. or if the sky itself had briefly signaled something he could not yet comprehend. In the days that followed, he continued to document each observation. The small notebook on his bedside table had grown thick with descriptions of subtle events. The shimmer of dew reflecting moonlight, the precise timing of shadows cast by the rising moon, the soft vibrations in the soil when the wind shifted across the field. Some entries were accompanied by sketches, others by notes on emotion, tactile sensation, or fleeting intuition. Each record was an attempt to grasp what remained ungraspable, to give shape to the formless. Occasionally he felt a resonance in his own body, a subtle hum that seemed to echo the movements of the night. It was neither pain nor discomfort, but a persistent awareness, like an instrument tuned to a frequency others could not hear. Antônio learned to walk in harmony with it, letting it guide his attention without demanding explanation. The farm, too, seemed to acknowledge the change. Animals behaved with subtle differences. Horses paused longer to observe him. Dogs turned their heads toward empty spaces as though sensing movement unseen. Chickens hesitated, feathers ruffling slightly when the wind carried faint, irregular vibrations. The world had not altered outwardly, but its textures had shifted, inviting him to notice connections and patterns previously overlooked. Antônio began to test himself intentionally. He would sit silently beneath the stars for long stretches, closing his eyes and focusing on the flow of sensation through his body, listening to the whispers of the fields, the hum of the earth, the quiet language of wind and night. He imagined that the stars themselves might be listening, patient, teaching him observation without judgment. These exercises did not always yield results, but when they did, the rewards were profound. A shimmer at the edge of vision, a fleeting pattern in the treetops, a sudden understanding of the rhythm of nocturnal lifefall provided validation that his perception had been expanded, that the ordinary and extraordinary were intertwined in ways he could not yet name. Curiosity deepened, not as anxiety, but as a gentle hunger for connection. He began to wonder whether others, perhaps scattered across Brazil or the world, had touched the same extraordinary threads, perceived the same subtle messages, or felt the same echoes in their bodies. It was a question that invited exploration, yet did not demand immediate answers. The night, he realized, was patient, and understanding unfolded slowly for those who listened. One evening, the sky was unusually clear, stars bright and unblinking. Antônio sat on a low fence, the cool wood beneath his palms, and watched a faint glow shift near the horizon. It was not the craft, not in any familiar sense, yet it carried the same gentle insistence of presence he had felt before. The glow pulsed softly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Not alarming, not urgent, simply there, luminous and calm. He held his breath, attuning himself to the sensation, feeling the subtle vibration in the air, the faint resonance in his chest. And then, as silently as it had appeared, the glow faded. He exhaled slowly, a mixture of wonder and calm settling through him. Later, he would write it down, not as a proof, not as a claim, but as a record of attention, a testament to the patience required to perceive the unseen. The act of recording became part of the experience, weaving memory and observation into a single, deliberate practice. Night after night, Antônio developed a quiet ritual, tending to the farm during the day, documenting subtle impressions, observing the sky, listening to the fields. The work grounded him, while the observations expanded his awareness. He discovered that ordinary life could coexist with the extraordinary, that patience and attentiveness could reveal layers of reality invisible to most. And always, in the quietest moments, he felt her presence, not the being herself, but the imprint of her calm focus, the memory of the gesture toward the stars, the unspoken communication that had guided him down the ladder. It was a presence without form, a reminder of what had been revealed and what remained beyond immediate perception. He began to wonder if that presence had shaped him as much as the night itself. Perhaps it was not the craft or the beings alone, but the experience of careful attention, observation, and humility before the unknown that had changed him most profoundly. In time, he realized that these nights of observation were not about seeking dramatic proof or demanding answers. They were about alignment of perception, of patience, of presence. The extraordinary was not always visible. Often it whispered between the stars, in the silence of the field, and the subtle textures of the earth. And as Antônio Villas Boas lay in bed each night, notebook closed, listening to the faint hum of the wind, he understood something crucial. The unseen was not always revealed, but it was always present. It existed between moments, between sensations, between breaths, and those who paid attention could feel its pulse, quietly, insistently, as steady as the night sky itself. The stars above Minas Gerais shone on, indifferent yet intimate, and Antonio slept with one eye open in the mind's eye, attuned to the gentle echoes that might emerge once more. The night had deepened, and with it, so had his quiet understanding of presence. Chapter 10. Encounters of the Mind. The mornings in snow, Francisco de Sales began with a slow gold, the sun rising over fields dotted with maize and cassava, illuminating the small farmhouse in warm, forgiving light. Antônio Villas Boas moved among the familiar tasks with a new kind of awareness. Each motion, fetching water, feeding animals, tending the crops, carried with it the hum of memory, the echo of a night that had rewritten the boundaries of his ordinary life. He often caught himself pausing mid-step, listening not just to the sounds of the farm, but to the subtle vibrations beneath his feet, the resonance of air through the leaves, the rhythm of the clouds drifting overhead. These were not signs of superstition or fear, but of attention, careful attunement to the patterns that threaded through life, the ones that others might overlook. Memory and reality began to fold together in unexpected ways. At times, he would sit under the canopy of stars before sleep, tracing the sky with his eyes, remembering the bright red glow of the craft and the strange, calm efficiency of the beings. Their presence lingered in the corners of his perception, not as fear, but as a quiet insistence that the universe might operate along rules he had yet to comprehend. He began experimenting with his mind, testing the edges of recall and perception. Sitting quietly in the barn, eyes closed, he would replay the night in slow motion. The ladder's descent, the touch of the gelatinous covering, the hum of the interior, the large blue eyes of the female being. Each detail he revisited became more vivid, sharper, as if observing a memory from the inside rather than the outside. In these exercises, he discovered that the experience had left traces beyond memory alone, subtle shifts in attention, small impulses in movement, the ability to notice patterns in shadows or the alignment of stars. These were not imagined. They were imprinted, a residue of contact with something beyond ordinary perception. But with this awareness came introspection. He began to question not just what had happened, but what it meant for him personally. Why him? Why this night? Why these beings? These questions were not pressing in urgency, but insistent, demanding quiet reflection. He realized that understanding might not arrive in the form of answers, but through observation, awareness, and patient attention to the world and himself. He also explored his interactions with others differently. Conversations with neighbors or fellow farmers became exercises in subtle perception. He noticed shifts in tone, hesitation in speech, unspoken curiosity hidden beneath skepticism. People were unknowingly revealing their own awareness of the extraordinary, their own questions silently mirrored in gestures, glances, and pauses. At times, he imagined the beings observing from afar, not physically present, but connected to the flow of attention. Their guidance, subtle and unspoken, seemed less like direction and more like a soft shaping of perception, teaching, nudging, suggesting without ever intruding. He began to see the encounter as a bridge, not only between worlds, but between consciousness, memory, and careful observation. One evening, a thin mist rolled over the fields. The air smelled of damp earth and flowering shrubs, carrying the faint scent of distant rain. Antonio walked slowly, noting how the mist altered perception. Shapes became ambiguous, shadows elongated. The ordinary became subtly strange. He paused near the edge of the field and raised his hand, as if sensing an unseen form in the haze. Nothing appeared in the physical sense, yet a deep certainty settled in his chest. The space was alive, responsive, waiting for attention, patience, and understanding. The nights of reflection began to teach him patience and humility. Extraordinary events, he realized, were often silent and unhurried. They arrived without spectacle, demanding observation more than reaction. They were lessons in stillness, in noticing, in acknowledging what lay just beyond ordinary comprehension. Antonio also began experimenting with dreams, recognizing their connections to perception. He would lie in bed, not attempting to control the dream, but inviting subtle attention to it. Shapes, lights, and beings sometimes appeared, not as frightening images, but as gentle echoes of the night he had witnessed. Some were familiar, some entirely new. It all carried the same calm insistence that observation and awareness mattered more than certainty. In time, he began to write again, this time exploring not only the events themselves, but the sensations, reflections, and subtle shifts in his consciousness. The notebooks filled with sketches of patterns, descriptions of hums and vibrations, notes on the alignment of stars, and careful reflections on emotions unspoken. Writing became meditation, memory, and evidence, all at once. Through these exercises, he discovered an internal rhythm, a flow connecting ordinary life, memory, dreams, and observation. He no longer saw the world as divided between extraordinary and mundane. Every moment contained layers, some apparent, some latent, all accessible to those who cultivated attention and patience. Even work in the fields became a study in perception. He noticed the subtle sway of leaves, the rhythm of water in irrigation ditches, the silent communication among animals. Each observation felt connected to the night of the encounter, as if the being's influence had expanded his awareness of natural patterns, teaching him to see depth in ordinary moments. And still, the questions persisted, but no longer with anxiety. He asked himself, quietly, could he ever fully understand the beings? Could he interpret their intentions? Or was the gift simply awareness? The capacity to notice the extraordinary without needing to explain it entirely. The answers seemed less important than the process. Observation, reflection, patience, and documentation became his path. Every detail mattered, every night offered new impressions, and every interaction with the ordinary world carried traces of the extraordinary. One particularly clear night, the sky glittered with stars, unbroken by clouds. Antonio lay on the roof of the barn, looking upward, feeling the subtle pulse of the air, the distant hum of the earth beneath him. In that quiet moment, he sensed again the faint rhythm of the beings, neither threatening nor commanding, simply present. He understood. Encounters were not always physical. Some existed in perception, in awareness, in the patience to notice subtle rhythms of reality. The world was richer than it appeared, layered, luminous, waiting for those willing to observe deeply. And as sleep claimed him, drifting softly into dreams shaped by memory and imagination, he felt the echoes of that night linger. Gentle, persistent, luminous, reminding him that extraordinary events could leave lasting impressions beyond the body, in the mind, and in the quiet spaces of attention. The ordinary and the extraordinary had merged, and Antônio Villas Boas walked between them, quietly, attentively, aware that the night still had lessons to offer, patient, persistent, and endlessly luminous. The darkness outside carried no threat, only the promise of understanding that grew in silence. Chapter 11. Traces of the Beyond. The days on the farm moved with their usual rhythm, sunlight spilling over the fields, the low hum of insects, the occasional distant bark of a dog. Yet for Antônio Villas Boas, each movement through his world carried the weight of a subtle duality. The ordinary and the extraordinary coexisting, layered, intertwined. The tractor hummed steadily as he repaired its worn gears. The chickens pecked and clucked. The wind rustled through the tall stalks of corn, but beneath it all, a quiet awareness pulsed, a thread connecting him to that night of red light and silent beings. He noticed the traces first in the smallest details. A sudden alignment of clouds, a shimmer in the distant tree line, a subtle vibration underfoot when the wind shifted. It was as if the earth itself had absorbed the memory of the night and whispered it back in faint, almost imperceptible signals. He would pause, kneel, or reach out, as though touching invisible filaments connecting him to a larger tapestry. At times, the marks left on his body during the encounter surfaced again not as pain, but as memory imprinted in sensation. A slight tenderness in the shoulder when he lifted the plow, a flicker of warmth in the skin near the neck, a subtle pulse along the wrist. They reminded him that the extraordinary had left its fingerprint, quietly, on both body and mind. Curiosity became a patient companion. He revisited his notebooks, reading over his past entries, sketches of star alignments, observations of subtle shifts in wind and light, descriptions of patterns in shadows and dew. He began to see connections he had overlooked before, threads linking moments and sensations that at first seemed isolated. It was as if the night had left a map, not of place, but of awareness, waiting for him to follow. Neighbors noticed subtle changes too. Antonio spoke with quieter confidence, listened with sharper attention, and seemed to notice things that escaped casual observation. Some commented on his calm demeanor, his steady presence. Others, more cautiously, wondered at his quiet attentiveness. He did not boast. He did not explain. The experience was his, intimate yet shared through his presence, his careful listening, and his patient engagement with the ordinary world. The nights deepened his awareness further. He would lie under the stars, feeling the soft pulse of the air, tracing the alignment of distant constellations, sensing a rhythm that seemed to move between the earth and sky. Sometimes, a faint shimmer would appear near the horizon, not harsh or alarming, but subtle, luminous, like a quiet signal from a world just beyond perception. He began to interpret these moments not as signs or messages, but as invitations to pay attention, to observe, to notice patterns that others might dismiss. The extraordinary, he realized, often whispered. It did not announce itself with spectacle or alarm. It waited, patient, subtle, insistent in its quiet persistence. Dreams began to carry traces of these observations. Shapes and lights would appear, familiar yet strange, echoing sensations from that night. The female being, in particular, appeared often not as a threat, but as a presence of calm, curiosity, and guidance. Her gestures and dreams mirrored the unspoken lessons of the encounter. Notice, observe, integrate, and remain patient. Antonio recorded these dreams alongside his waking observations, noticing the continuity between the two, how dreams extended awareness rather than replacing it. The farm itself became a laboratory of perception. He noticed the way light played on leaves at dawn, the patterns of insect movement, the rhythm of birds in flight. Even the wind seemed to carry subtle signals, changes in direction, intensity, or resonance that he could now detect with an unusual precision. Ordinary life became a field for careful observation. The familiar transformed into a canvas for understanding what lay just beyond the surface. At times, doubt surfaced. Could he trust his senses? Were these observations real, or merely echoes of memory amplified by expectation? He approached the question with calm inquiry, testing his perception against reality, noting patterns, comparing nights, observing repetition and anomaly. Each test strengthened his confidence that the extraordinary was embedded in ordinary experience, not separate from it. He began to share fragments of his observations cautiously, with trusted friends and local researchers, speaking in measured terms, emphasizing patterns rather than claims. The responses varied. Some listened with curiosity, some with skepticism, but each interaction reinforced a quiet truth. Extraordinary experiences could be integrated into daily life, understood through careful observation, and shared without fear. Months passed, and Antonio grew more attuned to the rhythms of both the farm and the extraordinary. He could anticipate subtle shifts in the air, notice changes in the alignment of stars, detect vibrations that suggested distant movement. These skills were not mystical. They were extensions of attention, cultivated awareness, and patient observation. And always, the memory of the night lingered. The red light, the ladder, the hum of the craft. The blue-eyed presence, they were no longer mere memories, but anchors, reminders that the extraordinary could touch the ordinary, leaving traces in perception, body, and mind. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant hills, painting the sky with pink and violet hues, Antonio walked to the edge of the fields. The wind carried a faint hum, the air shimmered softly, and for a moment, he felt a resonance that matched the memory of that night. He stood quietly, heart steady, chest open, fully aware. A soft glow appeared on the horizon. It was faint, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakably present. It pulsed, gently, rhythmically, in perfect harmony with the subtle vibration he had begun to notice over months of observation. Not demanding, not urgent, simply there, luminous and calm. Antonio exhaled slowly, letting the sensation settle through him. No words were necessary. No explanation required. The night, the air, the stars, and the unseen presence all existed in harmony, inviting him to witness, to notice, and to integrate. And he understood that the traces of the beyond were not spectacular. They were subtle. They were patient. They were enduring, and in recognizing them, he had learned the most profound lesson of all. The extraordinary was inseparable from the ordinary, waiting patiently for those willing to observe, to listen, and to remember. The horizon glimmered faintly, a reminder that some mysteries do not announce themselves, they whisper, and only the attentive hear. Chapter 12. Lessons in Silence. The days stretched long over the rolling fields, sunlight warming the soil, teasing the edges of shadows that shifted slowly with the passage of time. Antônio Villas Boas moved among the familiar routines of farm life with a calm attentiveness that had become second nature. Each task, sweeping the barn, repairing fences, tending the animals, was now approached not just as labor, but as practice in noticing, in listening, in understanding the subtleties of the world around him. The night he had crossed into the unknown had not left him with fear. Instead, it had gifted him patience, a heightened awareness, and the quiet knowledge that there were layers to reality unseen by most. The extraordinary did not always announce itself with fire or noise. Often, it spoke in the soft rhythms of life, in vibrations just beyond perception, in glimmers of light that hinted at patterns and presences. Antonio began to teach himself how to perceive without needing to interpret too quickly. He would sit beneath the stars for hours, letting the sounds of the fields, wind rustling through the corn, distant frogs croaking, leaves brushing together, be the only guide. The rhythm of the night became a language he could sense rather than articulate, a subtle conversation that required patience, attention, and humility. He discovered that silence was not empty. It was alive, carrying information, connection, and resonance. In the stillness, he felt echoes of the being's presence, not in the form of physical intrusion, but as vibrations of intention, as patterns in motion, as gentle pulses that lingered long after memory alone had faded. These were not messages to decode, but invitations to observe, to align, to notice. Each day, he noticed small ways in which his perception had shifted. Shadows, previously static and ignored, now carried texture, subtly shifting in relation to the sun, wind, and movement of the air. Animals behaved differently in his presence, pausing to acknowledge him, observing as though they too sensed the lingering threads of the extraordinary. Even the earth itself seemed to hum faintly, a vibration he could now detect with patience and focus. He began to experiment with thought and reflection. Sitting quietly in the barn, he would allow memories, sensations, and imagination to intermingle. He reconstructed the events, in detail the soft glow of the craft, the hum that vibrated through his chest, the blue eyes of the female being, the gelatinous covering, the precise gestures and movements. But he did not stop there. He extended these memories, imagining their connections to the present moment. How wind, light, and shadow carried echoes of what he had experienced. Curiosity deepened, transforming into understanding. He realized that extraordinary events, no matter how brief or rare, were not interruptions of ordinary life. They were expansions of it. They provided insight into attention, presence, and awareness. To perceive them required patience, quiet observation, and a willingness to notice details others might overlook. He practiced documenting the subtle layers of reality, each notebook filled with descriptions of light, sound, vibration, and alignment, sketches of the stars and horizon lines, notes on changes in wind patterns, reflections on fleeting sensations, even the tiniest shifts in temperature or texture. Every observation became a bridge connecting the ordinary to the extraordinary. Sometimes, his attention drifted to questions that had no answers. Why him? Why that night? Why did these beings reach into his life so briefly, leaving traces rather than explanations? He accepted that some mysteries were meant to remain unresolved. The act of noticing, of engaging with subtlety, was itself the lesson. Understanding would come in layers, through patience, reflection, and attentiveness, rather than sudden revelation. One night, as a soft mist hovered over the fields. He stepped into it barefoot, feeling the cool moisture against his skin. The air vibrated faintly, and for the first time, he consciously aligned his attention with it, feeling the subtle rhythm of the earth and sky. A faint glow appeared near the horizon, not harsh, not commanding, simply luminous and persistent. He inhaled slowly, letting the sensation fill him, letting his awareness expand without trying to control or name it. The glow faded as quietly as it had appeared, leaving behind a lingering sense of resonance. Antônio smiled softly, understanding that the extraordinary did not need spectacle. Its presence was patient, subtle, and enduring. It existed in moments between moments, in attention, in silence, in the mindful noticing of life's textures. Over time, he recognized that the lessons of the night were not limited to observation. They had reshaped his relationship to thought, memory, and reflection. He learned to distinguish between reaction and attention, between fear and awareness, between assumption and observation. Ordinary life, with its chores and responsibilities, became an arena for cultivating these skills. He shared fragments of his understanding cautiously with a few trusted friends and researchers, speaking not of evidence or proof, but of attention, patience, and the subtle dimensions of perception. Some were skeptical, some intrigued, but all responded to the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. His experience was not a story to convince others, it was a demonstration of what careful observation could reveal. As the seasons shifted, Antônio continued to refine his awareness. He noticed subtle changes in the wind, minute shifts in light, faint resonances in the soil. Each sensation, however fleeting, was a thread connecting him to something larger than the ordinary, something patient, luminous, and persistent. And as he lay down at night, the soft hum of the farm around him, the stars shimmering overhead, he understood a profound truth. The extraordinary does not always need to be seen to be felt. Its traces linger in perception, memory, and presence. It exists in the quiet spaces of attention, in the act of noticing, in the willingness to be present to life itself. Antônio Villas Boas closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the lessons of the night settle into him. The world was unchanged outwardly, but within him, the ordinary and extraordinary had merged. He had learned to perceive beyond the visible, to notice what others might overlook, and to exist in harmony with the subtle rhythms of the earth, the air, and the unseen. The farm remained calm, the stars bright, the night alive with unspoken patterns, and Antônio, at peace with the unknown, knew that in patience, observation, and silence, the traces of the beyond could be felt, honored, and understood. The quiet of the fields carried wisdom. The extraordinary is always present, softly, patiently, for those who choose to notice. Chapter 13. Horizons of Understanding. The horizon stretched endlessly over the fields, bathed in a soft amber light as the sun began its slow descent. Shadows lengthened across the earth, mingling with the golden warmth, and Antônio Villas Boas walked along the edge of his land with a quiet reverence. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured, as if the soil itself whispered lessons in rhythm with the fading light. He had long since learned that the extraordinary was not an abrupt intrusion, a flash of chaos or fear. It existed in the gentle hum of life, in subtle shifts of perception, in fleeting patterns that could easily go unnoticed by those unaccustomed to attention. The night that had changed him remained vivid, yet its echoes had woven themselves seamlessly into his daily existence, teaching patience, humility, and wonder. As he paused to observe the fields, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here from the initial shock of the red light, and the strange beings to months of careful observation, reflection, and quiet experimentation with perception. He realized that understanding was not about proof, nor about convincing anyone else of what he had experienced. It was about cultivating attention, embracing the unseen, and living in harmony with the subtle rhythms of the world. The wind shifted gently across the crops, carrying faint, imperceptible vibrations that he had learned to sense. Leaves rustled in patterns that seemed deliberate, though ordinary in appearance. Antônio tilted his head, eyes scanning the distant horizon, attuned not only to what he could see, but to what he could sense. The landscape itself had become a guide, a teacher, an intimate companion. At night, The stars seemed to hum with quiet resonance. He would lie on the roof of the barn or beneath the open sky, feeling the pulse of the universe as if it were a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The faint glow that sometimes appeared on the horizon no longer startled him. It simply reminded him that the extraordinary often whispers rather than shouts. Patience, observation, and openness were the keys to perceiving what others might overlook. Antônio also considered the human dimension of the experience. The beings had been deliberate, precise, and calm, interacting with him in ways that were neither threatening nor dismissive. Their actions were subtle lessons. Notice without assumption, observe without intrusion, understand without demanding explanation. The night had offered him a template for perception, for engagement with the unknown, that transcended fear and curiosity alike. His reflections extended to others. He wondered how many people had glimpsed similar threads of reality without realizing it, how many had brushed against subtle presences, patterns, or vibrations, and dismissed them as coincidence. He imagined that if they had learned to notice with patience and humility, they too could perceive the richness of the extraordinary within the ordinary. The farm, once merely a place of labor, had transformed into a sanctuary of learning. Every morning, sunlight and shadow taught a lesson. Every breeze, every animal movement, every shift in the soil offered subtle information. Antônio approached each day with the awareness that life itself was layered, textured, and luminous for those willing to observe. Dreams continued to carry echoes of the encounter. Shapes, lights, and gestures appeared as if extensions of memory and perception, not as visions to frighten, but as gentle guides pointing toward deeper understanding. Antônio recorded them alongside his waking observations, noticing how seamlessly they intertwined, how the line between dream and memory, ordinary and extraordinary, had blurred into one continuous field of perception. He also reflected on time itself. The moments of the past, the night of the red light, the craft. The beings were no longer confined to a single point in memory. They existed in ongoing resonance, accessible in quiet observation, in reflection, in attention to the subtle vibrations of the world. Time had become more fluid, layered, offering lessons in every moment, not just in extraordinary events. Antônio realized that the greatest discoveries were often quiet, patient, and unannounced. The extraordinary did not demand recognition. It existed in gentle patterns, subtle harmonies, and fleeting traces that required mindfulness to perceive. Understanding emerged not from spectacle, but from the accumulation of attentive, deliberate noticing over time. As dusk deepened, the sky transformed into a canvas of stars and faint, lingering light. Antônio settled beneath an old fig tree, its branches swaying gently, and allowed himself to simply observe. The wind carried faint echoes of the night long past, the distant hum of life, and the faint pulse of possibility. He understood that this moment, quiet, luminous, patient, was as much a part of the extraordinary as the events themselves. He reflected on what he had learned, that awareness could bridge ordinary life and extraordinary experiences, that the unseen could teach lessons in patience, observation, and humility. That presence and attention were more revealing than explanation or proof. The night, the farm, the horizon, and the stars had all become guides, offering a wisdom that was subtle, persistent, and infinitely patient. Antônio Villas Boas breathed deeply, letting the resonance of the day and the night settle into him. He understood that his journey was not about mastering the extraordinary, but about living in harmony with it, attentive, curious, patient, and aware. Each moment carried traces of the unseen, and in noticing them, he had found a quiet power, a gentle clarity, and an enduring sense of connection to something larger than himself. The horizon stretched endlessly, yet it no longer held mystery in the sense of fear or confusion. It held opportunity, perception, and the calm certainty that the extraordinary was always present, woven into life, into the air, into the soil, into the quiet pulses of the world. And those who chose to observe, with patience and attention, could feel it, integrate it, and live in resonance with it. As the stars shimmered above Minas Gerais, Antônio closed his eyes and allowed sleep to carry him into dreams that were no longer separate from reality. Dreams that echoed and extended the gentle, luminous lessons of the night. He had come to understand that the extraordinary does not always need to be seen, it is experienced, felt, and integrated through attention, presence, and the willingness to notice the quiet patterns that weave through life. And with that understanding, he rested, calm, luminous, and deeply aware, knowing that the horizon always held more to observe, more to note, and more to integrate. The night settled over the fields, gentle and infinite, carrying the promise that attention and awareness reveal mysteries that the ordinary often conceals, reflections beneath the stars. The night had grown still, the fields silent save for the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. Antônio Villas Boas lay beneath the vast expanse of the Minas Gerais sky, the stars stretching endlessly above him, each one a pinprick of calm, patient light. He breathed in slowly, feeling the rhythm of the earth beneath him, the gentle pulse of wind through the crops, the subtle resonance of life all around. Looking back, he realized that the extraordinary night, the red glow, the craft, the silent beings, the gelatinous touch, the luminous eyes of the female presence had left him with more than memory. It had left him with a lens, a way of seeing, a method of noticing, a practice of attention that transformed the ordinary into something layered, textured, and luminous. The event had not frightened him. It had opened him, expanded him, taught him that reality was often subtler and deeper than appearances alone could reveal. The lessons he carried were quiet but profound. The extraordinary does not always demand recognition. It whispers, nudges, and lingers in the margins of perception. It exists in the rhythm of the wind, the shimmer of the soil, the alignment of the stars, and in the subtle vibrations of the body. It is not always spectacular. It is patient, persistent, and waiting for those willing to notice. Antônio understood that awareness itself had become his most powerful tool. To observe deeply, to reflect patiently, and to integrate subtle experiences into daily life was, in itself, a kind of communion with the unknown. There was no need for proof, no necessity to convince others. The extraordinary resides in perception, in attention, and in the gentle practice of noticing what might otherwise go unseen. He thought of the beings again not with fear or confusion, but with quiet gratitude. Their presence had taught him patience, attention, and humility. They had offered no answers, no explanations, but instead provided a path to move through life with eyes open, to feel the pulse of the world, and to understand that mysteries are not always solved, they are observed, honored, and integrated into existence. As he drifted into sleep, the soft hum of the earth, the whisper of the wind, and the distant shimmer of stars wove together in his mind. The extraordinary was not a momentary flash of fear or wonder. It was a lifelong companion, patient and luminous, waiting to be noticed in the quiet, gentle rhythms of life. And so, beneath the stars of Minas Gerais, Antônio Villas Boas rested, mind God calm/heart open, aware that the universe often speaks not through spectacle, but through the quiet traces it leaves for those who pay attention, those who watch, and those who listen. The night continued its slow, patient song, and the extraordinary, always present, lingered softly in every breath, every shadow, and every pulse of the world. Even in silence, the universe whispers its lessons, and the attentive heart is always listening.